America. 40,000 years ago, men started to migrate across the Bering Straits that divided America from China, Europe, and Africa. Those who stayed north or strayed far south adapted to their surroundings and became nomadic hunters and gatherers. They formed tribes that were called by the Europeans as native Indians. The Indians had very close ties with nature. They looked on owning land they lived on and off, much like we look on owning the air we breathe in and out. They invented the birch bark canoe, which for its light weight carries the heaviest load in the shallowest water. They invented the teepee that stays cool in summer, warm in winter, and can be quickly rolled up and easily dragged to another place. They developed skills in horsemanship and in the use of the bow and arrow. Those who stayed in the Central Park of America exploited and tamed the fertile land and settled as farmers. By 2000 BC, they started to develop civilizations like the Mayas and Aztecs, who excelled in mathematics and astrology and were skilled in agriculture, engineering, and metalworking. Unfortunately, the Europeans burned all their books. The Mayas invented the wheel, but only used it as a toy. Their civilization lasted 2,600 years. The Incas, further south, were at the peak of their civilization just as the Europeans arrived in 1500. They mined, worked, and collected gold, which greatly attracted the Europeans, who with their magical firearms and light skin color were regarded as gods. By 1600, settlements started to form by people escaping from Europe. The first immigrants were called Puritans. 10,000 Puritans sailed to America to escape persecution, only to end up persecuting the native Indians. In England, the jails were overcrowded with the desperate poor, and 50,000 convicts were sent to America. By 1700, slaves started to be imported from Africa. In 1776, after 6 years of fighting, America finally gained its independence from England. It had 13 colonies with 2.5 million people. Nearly 1 in 5 Americans were black slaves. Their Declaration of Independence states that all men are equal and have rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In 1791, the Bill of Rights was adopted. It forbids federal restriction of personal freedoms and guarantees a long range of legal protections. These limitations serve to protect the natural rights of liberty and property, including freedoms of religion, speech, free press, free assembly, and free association, as well as the right to keep and bear firearms. Originally, the Bill of Rights included legal protection for white men only, excluding African Americans and women. By 1800, the northern states abolished slavery. Americans were eager to expand westward and prompted a long series of wars with the Indians, which later led to the policy of removing them from their land and relocating them in reservations. In 1848, gold was discovered in California and spurred Western migration. 300,000 people rushed there, many from all over the world. New railways made relocation easier for settlers and increased conflicts with native Indians. 100,000 Indians were killed in that time in an attempt to push them out of the way. Up to 40 million buffalo were slaughtered for skins and meat and to ease the railway's spread. The loss of the buffalo, a primary resource for the Indians, was an existential blow to many of them. In 1861, Americans fought a civil war that lasted 4 years and killed more than 600,000 people. The war was over the right to keep slavery and over the right to secession. The northern states won. The right to secede was denied, and slavery was abolished for the entire land. In 1867, America bought Alaska from Russia for $7 million, or about $5 a square kilometer. Then, in 1900, gold was discovered in the Klondike, and 100,000 people from all over the world rushed up to Alaska to look for it. America remained neutral for most of World War I, entering only at the very end to save the day and win the war for England and France. In 1913, America delegated a group of private banks to be the national bank called the Federal Reserve, and it gave it a mandate to make all monetary decisions on behalf of the country. For the next 20 years, the bankers celebrated in what was to be later called the Roaring Twenties. In 1920, the women's rights movement won passage of a constitutional amendment granting women's suffrage, which really added to the party mood. New technologies like cars, movies, radios, and telephones shrunk distance and speeded up time and greatly modernized the people. Frills were shed in fashions and buildings, and people stretched their new-found freedom with jazz, dancing, drinking, and smoking. All the partying irritated the churches, and they successfully lobbied for prohibition of alcohol, which lasted 13 years. This led to the rise of the mafia and organized crime that supplied the demand for contraband alcohol. In 1930, the 20 years of partying suddenly ended with 10 years of depression. Economic recovery came with World War II, with America supplying materials of war. America saved the day once again and was able to end the war by dropping 2 atomic bombs on Japan, killing 200,000 people. America and Russia jockeyed for power after the war and developed powerful nuclear arsenals in what was called the Cold War. Subversive anti-communist groups formed within America and terrorized anyone with left-leaning politics, just like the Ku Klux Klan terrorized anyone with black skin. 1960 was the start of the hippie generation. It was a time of laying back and not doing too much. By 1965, sexual and racial discrimination was outlawed and women's rights were promoted. Then, like the Munchies, consumerism set in. It was fired by mass media that technology drove to brainwash and hook America into consuming anything that was marketed. Cannabis was widely available and promoted. It gave people a let it be attitude that turned into a carefree attitude that could be easily changed into a care not attitude. That attitude kept people passively drifting down with the river in whatever direction it was made to flow, whether through rapids of war or through the marshes of regrowth. Those in control knew that to progress and to leap ahead, people needed to be marketed a different drug, one that gives a yes I can attitude. So they outlawed cannabis and pushed the consumption of sugar, alcohol, caffeine, nicotine, codeine, heroin, ecstasy, and LSD. Within a few generations, many steps forward were made by many individuals, resulting in great leaps for mankind. Each leap was used by others as a start for other leaps. By 1970, America had leaped to the moon and to the stars beyond. And the hippies turned to young urban professionals called yuppies. A few homosexuals marketed high heels, makeup, and fashion to women who wanted sex appeal. Entrepreneurs marketed beer, cigarettes, and sports to men who wanted sex appeal also. The keep society of the pioneers of a few hundred years ago, who wanted to keep everything they got their hands on, turned to the throwaway society that wanted always the best and newest products that were marketed. By 1980, America was addicted to toys to play with and gasoline to run his car. Because his money was accepted worldwide, he printed as much as he needed to. He played the sheriff role towards the ever-shrinking world because he wanted to maintain his reputation as savior, having saved his mother England and France twice in the last 100 years. By 2000, America's addiction caused him to go into such deep debt that he was forced to start selling his house to feed his addiction. From America, we learn that after every high comes a low, and that after every low comes a high, and that the higher you are, the harder you fall. We also learn that too much freedom is dangerous, and that addictions can ruin your life.